Good afternoon, Bangalore. It's wonderful to be here. Today, sadly, Anuradha Roy is not here. She was supposed to be in conversation with Jeet, but of course, Indigo had other plans, and so I was a last-minute substitute. But hopefully, this will be a fruitful conversation for you all in the audience. Jeet and I have spoken many times before, so I'd like to think this is a continuation rather than a beginning. I wanted to talk a little bit about Jeet and his work, even though Jimmy did introduce him. I think many authors in India tend to create a genre and they stick to that, especially when they find success. And I think what's unique about Jeet Thayil is that he hasn't done that. He's written the big books. He's done books like the Book of Chocolate Saints, Narcopolis, which was shortlisted for the Booker. He's done short books like Low, which was a harrowing account kind of based on his own life. And then, of course, he's a poet and musician. And I think there are very, very few authors who actually straddle so many genres and do it successfully. And I think that's what makes him special as a writer today in India. Today we're going to be talking about Elsewhereans, his new book that came out came out earlier this year. And this also is something different. It's a novel in a way, and he calls it a documentary novel. So maybe we can start with why a documentary novel, and what does a documentary novel mean?
I grappled with this. Hello, everybody. Pleasure to be here at the Bangalore Literature Festival, my favorite festival in India, if not the world, because I live here. Yeah, anyway, why a documentary novel? Because I had photographs in this book of real people, my parents. And I told the story of their lives as well as other people who appear under their own name in the book. There are letters, actual letters. There's a letter written by a character from Hazaribagh Central Jail on the letterhead. So there are documents in this book, but at the same time, it's fiction. So I knew I couldn't call it a novel because there are actual names in it, and I knew I couldn't call it nonfiction because, you can be canceled for doing that these days. James Fry, if you remember, is a case in point. So I tried to come up with a phrase that was true to the nature of the book, and I came up with a documentary novel. And the question that arose when writing this book was, if you're using actual people with their own names and their own likeness in a book, and you're getting them to do things they might not have done and say things that they might never say in real life, as with my parents, you have to ask permission. So I did ask permission, and my father was very happy to be a character in a book. My mother, being wiser, knowing what it probably involved, wasn't happy with the idea, but there was no question that she would say no. She eventually said yes, reluctantly, yes. And I'll just say that there's an epigraph, one of several, at the opening of the novel that is from the great poet Czeslaw Milosz, which goes, "When a writer is born into a family, the family is finished." I think there might be several families in the audience that would agree with that.
So this is a novel for those of you who haven't read it yet and will read it soon after the session and go and buy a copy. It centers around a couple. There's a journalist father and there is a very intrepid Malayali mother. And we'll talk more about both the characters, but the central idea of the novel is the idea of movement and how we are all defined by the places we go to, the places we end up living in. And it's sort of an anthem in praise of migration. And I think that's why this is an important novel for a time like this, where the entire idea of migrants is being so frowned upon and they're kind of being demonized, etc. So can we just talk a little bit about that, about the essence of movement and how it kind of molds all the characters in this book?
These days, if you ask someone the question, where are you from? Nobody is going to reply to that question with one sentence. or a word. Because none of us is from a single place anymore. We have, we're from several places. We've been formed by several different eras. And even if you have lived in one place your whole life, for example, Bangalore, even if you were born here and you've lived here your whole life, the city has changed so much in a couple of decades that you feel like you are from elsewhere. And I think that's a kind of a human condition right now, that feeling that we're from elsewhere. We're not from here. We may be from Jayanagar, but Jayanagar is no longer Jayanagar, you know. Bangalore is no longer Bangalore. It's becoming something greater, hopefully, certainly something bigger, something noisier, as is every city. So I thought it would be a useful thing to use that as a kind of a running thread that runs through the book and kind of unites the various characters and the various incidents that happen, because it is a series of discrete stories within a novel, and this is the link that connects them.
I want to talk about the mother figure in the book because she's fascinating, and she's this adept swimmer who can kind of, is comfortable in the backwaters of Kerala, but then she's also a smart stockbroker in Hong Kong. So she straddles these various lives and she does them all expertly. So for someone like her who manages to make a home elsewhere, even though she's very sort of rooted in Kerala, what does movement and migration do to her, and how does it mold her as a character?
Yeah, this is someone who grew up in a little village in Kerala and gets married and moves to Bombay, and then moves to Patna, and then moves to Delhi, and then back to Bombay, and then to Hong Kong and New York, and Hong Kong and Bombay and Bangalore. Somebody who, at the time she gets married at 23 or so, has nothing behind her but this tiny village, but who is thrown into the deep end of the world and learns to swim like a very adept fish through the world. Because of some aspect of character that allows her to be comfortable wherever she is and to be who she is wherever she is. And this is really someone who is the business brain of the family, without whom certainly the other members of the family would have had it much harder, let's put it that way.
What is that aspect of character which allows her to be at home everywhere? And I think you've said this even about yourself, how you are a true traveler. You can go to various countries and people will ask you for directions because you look like a native and of different places. So what is this aspect of character?
I think it's knowing that wherever you go, the people you meet, whatever color they might be, whatever language they might speak, are like you. And there really is very little difference in the essential things. For example, when my family went to Hong Kong, my mother would go to this place called the Lanes, which connected two main roads on the island, on the peak. And that's where all the shops were, on these stairs. And that's where you went to buy whatever. And the first thing she learned was that if you didn't bargain with the shopkeepers in Chinese, they immediately didn't respect you and learned to treat you like a tourist and cheat you and quote whatever, and they know that you would say yes. So the first thing she learned to say was "Kedo China," which means how much. And then whatever they said, she would say no. And immediately this kind of a bond was formed. And it's a very Asian thing, which at this point, I think is true on Canal Street in New York as well. So I think it's just a sense of knowing that whoever you meet, wherever you might meet them, they're not that different from you.
That's interesting. In contrast, there's the father figure, right? I mean, he's this brilliant professional, he's a great journalist, he's an acclaimed editor. But in terms of personal life, or even in terms of interactions with others, he's a bit standoffish and he's a bit reserved. So what did movement do to him? Was he as at home as your mother in different places, or did he have a different relationship with places and people?
Yeah, I think he wasn't as at home in any kind of group or place he might have been thrown into. She was, but I think a lot of uh, the the success in their partnership had to do with the dynamic between them. Uh, they were very different as people, but they wanted the same things, and they made a great team. For example, my father had absolutely no sense of money. He had no idea how to make money grow. All he knew was how to earn it, and being from the Gandhian generation, he had a kind of an embarrassment about earning money. For example, in his last job in the Indian Express in Bangalore, he worked there for 25 years. When they came to discuss his salary, he asked for 1,001 rupees, which is just kind of ridiculous. I mean, we could have used a proper salary, the family could have, but it's a very Gandhian thing, whereas my mother was just the opposite. She would talk about money like it was a living thing, and she knew how to use it to make it grow and what to do with it. He was clueless. So together they were a great team.
Who have you gone on?
I've got the worst of both sides.
I want to talk a little bit more about the male characters in the book. So, of course, there's the father, again, and his brother, your uncle. Both very well-read, both very literary people, and both harbor literary aspirations. The father has written, I think, 20 non-fiction books, but he's always wanted to write a novel. The uncle is, again, very well-read, but he wants to be a poet. You are both. You're both a novelist and a poet. So can we talk a little bit about that, about how, sometimes dreams are deferred for the next generation?
Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't aware until much later that in a way I was bringing what they wanted to life. So as it was happening, I had no idea at all. I had always wanted to be a writer. I only learned about my father's novelistic ambitions much later. Although I always knew he had literary ambitions, because the first time I read poetry was from his bookshelf. The first novels I read were from his bookshelf, and they were very literary novels. He had Ulysses, he had Henry James, he had Dylan Thomas, Virginia Woolf. This is serious writing. It's not an amateur reading. So I read those books, and it didn't strike me until much later, and because of some things that he said and wrote, in fact, that he had always wanted to write a novel. With my uncle, who was translating Baudelaire, he was working throughout his life on a Malayalam translation of Baudelaire. I mean, can you think of anything more insane? I can't. That's really kind of crazy. So he was translating Baudelaire into Malayalam in the form that it was in French. So if it was a sonnet, he would translate it into a rhyming stanzas of 14 lines that rhymed in Malayalam. And no one translator has ever translated the Fleur du Mal, Baudelaire's great book, in all these years, in all of literary history. So that was his great aim, to translate Fleur du Mal, to be the single translator of Fleur du Mal into Malayalam. And he had done about a dozen. He had a full-time job as a lawyer, and he was traveling all over the place. And then he died very young, at 50, at a legal conference in London. He had done maybe a dozen of those poems, so that never happened. In a way, you feel a kind of responsibility.
Right. I want to talk a little bit about cities, right? I think cities have been a sort of common theme to a lot of your writing, whether it was Bombay at the start, and then, of course, you've written about Delhi, and now, of course, we have Kerala in the most recent book. I'm sorry, I just lost my train of thought. But the book that came out while, in fact, Elsewhereans came out was your poetry book on cities, right? And maybe we can just talk about how those two fed into each other and how they kind of nourished each other, the poetry book about cities and Elsewhereans.
Good point, because the Elsewhereans was originally a much bigger book. I ended up deleting about 40,000 words. And there were parts in that that just didn't fit with the story of the Elsewhereans, but were great stories in themselves, and they were all stories of cities. For example, running into Samuel Beckett on a bridge in Paris at midnight, and walking past him, seeing this figure come out of the dark, realizing it was Samuel Beckett, realizing he realized I realized it was Samuel Beckett, and his eyes said, "Please don't speak to me. I know you know who I am, but please don't speak to me." And I didn't. I walked past him. But I wrote about it, and it was part of the Elsewhereans, but it didn't fit the story that eventually came together, which was much tighter than what I started with. So that became a poem in The City Under the City. It became one of the poems. You know, when you delete 40,000 words, you think, wow, that's a huge chunk of text to put in the bin. But the thing is, nothing is ever really wasted. You know, if something is worthwhile, you'll use it in some other context. And which is a wonderful thing about poems. You know, a poem can be about anything, really.
You mentioned poems, and I think just earlier today you had a very interesting Instagram post where you put up an article from, I think, 30 years ago, and it had you, it had Ranjit Hoskote, it had Vijay Nambishan, like all, you know, a generation of great Indian poets, and you said, "We poets begin in madness." So 30 years later, where has that journey taken you?
Well, I was playing with the actual quote, which is Wordsworth, and it goes, "We poets in our youth begin in gladness, but thereof come in the end despondency and madness." But I kind of flipped that and said, "We poets in our youth begin in madness," because certainly the poets in that on that page did begin in madness and then kind of straightened out and became more sober. Although I have to say, Ranjit was always sober. He was always not mad. But it just, you know, that was the reason that caption happened. What was the question?
Where has that journey taken you 30 years later, the journey that began in madness?
Honestly, it has taken me into gladness. It flipped the Wordsworthian script. Just because I think I never expected to survive this long, to tell you the truth, but it's just that when you do the same thing for a long time, for decades, and you finally figure out how to do something right. For example, how to write a sonnet, how to use form, how to write a novel. Nobody knows how to write a novel until you write a novel. And the minute you write a novel and you realize how kind of horrifying it is, how much dull labor it involves, you become very sympathetic towards people who write novels. You know, even if the novel has failed, it changes the way you look upon your own vocation, and I think it really helps to be at it for a while, because certainly as a younger person in forget my 20s, I won't even go there, but in my 30s and even in my 40s, I wasn't fully aware or fully cognizant of power in terms of what that requires as a writer. I think I'm just figuring it out. You know.
You quoted Wordsworth so eloquently, so maybe let's hear one of your poems. Do you have something about power? Just, okay.
Since we were talking about City Under the City, I'll read one.
Sure.
This is from The City Under the City. It's called New Age Blood Sport. It's about Gaza. They know how to kill. They're gifted at this. They can kill at a distance, up close, from the sky, from the sea, when you expect it, when you don't. When you're with your shrunken family, when you're alone or praying or asleep, when you're playing or sick, when you're tending to the dead. They are skilled at killing. Their machinery is new and complex. They've invested years of labor, more money than you'll ever see. When not working, they like to dance at festivals all over the world. They get high in the mountains, swim in the oceans, brown in the sun. They open cafes in distant places where locals aren't allowed to enter. The menus are in their language. The food is healthy, clean, and cheap. They eat with friends, watch the boats, nap after lunch, buy quilts for the winter, watch movies with the sound on mute so as not to disturb the baby. They drink apple, beetroot, carrot juice first thing in the morning, get on a Zoom call and laugh and sleep the sleep of innocence. Thank you.
I think poets reading their poetry is one of the great joys of literature festivals. Since we are on the topic of poetry, can we talk a little bit about the different labor that prose and poetry involve? And I think at one point you said you were never going to write poetry again, and then you returned to it. So just maybe about your own trajectory with both the forms over the many decades.
Writing a novel is like a 9-to-5 job. You turn up at the desk. That's all you really do. You turn up at the desk and you work for however long, 3-4 hours, 2 hours, 1 hour, few hours, a break, and then whatever, But it's a job. There's not much that's fun about it. And you do it every day, sometimes for years, without any sense of accomplishment, of having finished something, because you can't see the end of it. But you have to believe in it, and you have to believe in yourself, and that's the hardest thing about writing a novel. Writing a poem is a whole other thing. You write it at one go, even if you revise it and rewrite it later over weeks and months. The soul of it happens in one burst, and that burst, when that happens, it's a joyful thing. There's joy involved. Which is why I think you have to be in the mood to write a poem. This collection, The City Under the City, I would write a poem, send it to Kinsella, he would write one, send it back. And the way he writes a poem, he writes it, the minute he gets it, he would sometimes return it within hours. It would take me much longer because I would have to feel in that, there's a certain kind of feeling that you get. It's similar to the feeling you get when you're coming down with the flu, or if you're just feeling kind of sick, or maybe when you're pregnant, although I wouldn't know. But you get this feeling that there's something changing inside you, and you never wait for that when writing a novel. If you were to wait for that, novels would never be written.
Today's Anuradha Roy was supposed to be in conversation with Jeet, and she's just brought out her first non-fiction book after years of writing absolutely wonderful novels. And the name of this session is called On the Hill, and we really haven't talked about hills as yet. So maybe we can do a little hilly reading, I think, and also just to kind of celebrate Anuradha's book, because even if she's not here, I do hope some of you will read it and enjoy it.
It's a really beautiful book, and I was lucky to pick up a copy from Bookworm on Church Street in Bangalore. That is one of a few limited editions. It has color prints, watercolors, and the end papers at the back has passages that embody a kind of lyricism that can only be described as poetry. So here's one of them. There's several. I'm going to read one short, 2 sentences really. The good time to feed the earth is after the rains and before the snow. You have to wait until the marigolds and chrysanthemum have finished flowering, until the leaves on the horse chestnut trees turn bronze and the lianas climbing up the deodars turn to burgundy, until the magnolia pods have gone from dusty pink and muted vermilion to burnt umber, and burst open to throw out their red bead-like seeds, until falling leaves begin to cover the flower beds and the sun moves to another part of the sky and blazes through the swiftly fading afternoons before the long, dark, cold evening sets in.
Wonderful.
Beautiful.
Anuradha mentioned just in passing that I should ask you about food, and I was a bit surprised by that. And then I remembered you have a very vivid food description in Elsewhereans, and you talk about a Mallu Sadhya, essentially, and it's a wedding feast.
About the, yeah, you know, I've been to a lot of kind of Kerala weddings and feasts, in quotes, and one of the things that it takes a lot to get used to is the actual gusto with which the men in particular eat, you know. It's, there's food flying all over the place. There's, you know, wet rice up to the elbows, and there's just, it's animals feeding at the trough after many days of no food. And of course, you know, the dishes are delicious and all of that, but whenever I watched it, there was always an element of revulsion, maybe. So when it came time to write it, I thought, you know, there's a very good piece of advice, writing advice, which is always write about the things that bother you. So I went into that scene the scenes from my childhood as deep as I possibly could, and remembered things that I really would have rather forgotten, I think. And which is why I think those are the passages you're referring to.
We have about 10 minutes left, and I definitely want to leave time for audience questions. So if anyone wants to ask, just raise your hand and a mic will come to you. Any questions? Wow. Then we'll continue. Oh, did you raise your hand? Oh, sorry.
You know, the minute one person asks a question, then it just...
Hello.
Oh, great.
Yes,
Second hand.
Priyanka.
Excellent.
Yeah. About your time in Paris, could you tell a little bit about that? Like you lived in Shakespearean company, where the writers can live, you talk, which is in your book, and I really like that part. Yes.
Yeah, when I was very young and poor, I ended up in Paris with very little money, with just enough money to live for about maybe 3 or 4 days. I ended up living there for 6 weeks because I met somebody who taught me how to busk on the metro. So he borrowed a guitar, and we did 7 stops on the metro, which is the buskers' 7 stops, and then you come back. And we would do 2.5 songs. I would sing 2.5 songs. While my friend, this British guy called Neil, he would go to each passenger in the metro, open a purse in front of them, and very intimidatingly say, "Quelque chose pour la musique, s'il vous plaît," which means something for the music, please, but said in a quite menacing tone. And we always made quite a decent amount of money. which we would split 50-50 and use most of it for drink, you'll be surprised to hear. And of course, I couldn't afford a hotel room. I'd left my luggage in the left luggage counter at a station in Paris, and I was in a bookshop one day, Shakespeare and Company. I was looking at a copy of Jean Genet's Thief's Journal, and I thought how correct it would be to steal that. You know, it's a book about stealing by this great thief and poet and philosopher. I thought the correct thing to do with that book would be to steal it in Paris. I'd always wanted to read it. But then I realized that this was a family-owned store. And you can't steal from a family-owned store. If it was Higginbotham's, no problem. If it was Barnes & Noble, absolutely go for it. You know, good luck, I hope you make it. But not an eccentric family-run establishment like Paris, Shakespeare and Company. So I was there, I decided not to steal the Genet, and I was just looking at the poetry shelves when this man comes up to me, and he looked homeless, like he'd been sleeping on the street. He turned up, kind of really messy clothes and hair all over the place, holding a cat, an immaculate cat, far better groomed than its owner. And he came up to me and he said, pointed a finger at me and said, "Dravidian?" I was so shocked to be addressed with that word that I couldn't even, you know, I couldn't lie or even make a light response. I said, yes. And then he said, "Do you want a place to sleep?" And I said, yes. And that's how I came to stay at Shakespeare and Company. That man was George Whitman, who was the owner of Shakespeare and Company. Thanks for that question.
Hi. Yeah. Yeah, it's not really a question because initially there wasn't any question, so I thought of sharing an incident. Just as you said that your mother used to learn how much of the language. So when we went to Kathmandu, and this is my strategy also. So we went to Kathmandu and I just learned two Nepalese thing, that is kati, it's how much, and dhere mangu bhayo, that is it's too much. So I tried that with some orange sellers, and when I said with full confidence that it's dhere mangu bhayo, and he started firing in Nepalese, the bargaining all and everything, and then I went back to my Bengali Hindi and said, "बहुत दाम है भैया, हम ले नहीं सकते." So that's how it goes. So I just remember the things.
Thank you. Good story. Use it.
Thank you. Maybe sometimes. Thank you.
Hi, Jeet. I'm Shilpa. I have a question for you. Your observation skill is eminent. I want to ask you, like, how important is observation for a writer, or aspiring writer, or for a poet?
Thanks. Yeah, I think probably the most important skill. And to the extent that I no longer really trust my memory to remember details, so I just make quick notes on my phone sometimes. Just a word. You know, if you're meeting somebody and you know that you will want to write about that meeting, all you need is about 6 or 7 words that in the future, when you write about that encounter, they will trigger memories and trigger writing. I think of Dom Moraes, who used to do this a lot. He wrote a lot of nonfiction as well as poetry. And he did these interviews with, for example, Indira Gandhi, with Nehru, with all kinds of, with the Dalai Lama. And he would not record anything. They would have a conversation. Once in a while, he'd write a word. And the people he interviewed were surprised at this technique. But the point is, later when he wrote about it, he had almost complete recall. And nobody ever objected to his portrayal. And I think the point of that is, especially with nonfiction, if your writing is good, even if you misquote somebody, even if you forget something and forget the exact way they might have said a sentence and write it, kind of rewrite it, as long as it reads well, they will never object. They like it.
Sorry, I have a follow-up question to that. What is the most recent notes you've made on your phone which you could share with us? About which character? Like,
I have no idea. I'll tell you in a second. Yeah, somebody said time doesn't heal. And I added a few lines to it. I said, time doesn't heal, it obscures. Grief is replaced by new grief. I think of you now with a wince, not the old howl. The wolf has wandered off. I'm on a plane with a box of ashes again.
any more questions? Oh, great.
Hi, I'm Rahul. Uh, if you had to offer a few words of advice for somebody who's been aspiring to like write poetry and kind of like go mainstream publication, but just few things here and there, minor excuses, they've been holding them back. What would be what would be the core essence of advice that you would give to them, especially for someone who's interested in writing poetry?
First of all, I would offer my condolences because you're in for a hard time, my friend. The thing is, it's a very strange thing, but everybody knows how hard it is to be a poet, to write poetry, first of all, and then to get it published, and then to make something out of it. We all know it makes no money. It'll never make you money, you know that. You know that it's going to be really hard to get it out there, especially if you haven't been published. Everything that follows will be difficult. Even if by some miracle you get it published and it gets some good reviews and you make a name and you make some money, it'll take so long, but that by then you won't care. It'll mean nothing. But the weird thing is, poets still write poetry. Welcome, and my condolences, and I hope it works for you.
We finally have many hands up. Oh, wow. I think we only have time for one more. Maybe the gentleman at the back who's standing up here.
So good afternoon to you, sir. My name is Nagraj. You made a point that writing a poetry is a job of, there is no fixed. But writing a novel, there is a 9 to 5. But by and large, the creativity erupts between both, in the sense that, let's say, the poetry by and large is fixed with so many connected to the life or connected to the society. And novel, sometimes people write in a fiction mode. So my question that, how do you difference these? Since you made a point, it is between 9 to 5 job for the novel, and there is no fixed time for poetry. So can you just answer this?
I'm a full-time writer. I don't have another job. This is all I do. So at some point, if you write every day, and if that's your job, you will end up trying different genres. You'll try fiction, nonfiction, a play maybe, poems. And for me, at this point, I really don't differentiate so much. It's all writing. And it's just that it's all writing. Your obsessions always stay the same, but it takes different forms. It's like water in different in vessels that are each shaped in a different way. I hope that helps.
Wonderful. I think we are out of time, but thank you so much, Jeet. And as he said, poets will continue to write poetry, whether it makes them money or not. Thank you, the audience, for being here, and thank you, BLF, for having us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for coming.